themselves, tell you a little bit about themselves. We will then jump straight into your questions. We've already had some questions submitted, so thank you very much for that. And then if you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A box at the bottom, and then we will answer them. I will ask you, the 4 experts today, we all have access requirements of our own. So for me, my access requirement is patience. So it takes me a bit longer to answer, to go through, to scroll through the questions. So if you could please avoid using the chat box and use the Q&A only, that will help me immensely to keep up with your questions and make sure as many questions as possible can be answered. So because I started talking, I'm going to leave my introduction to the end, and I'm going to pass swiftly over to Ryan to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're calling from. My name's Ryan Compton. I'm Director of Centre for Resolution, which is a company that provides mediation, so we get involved very much from a perspective of where people are having disputes, and I'm very much the person in the middle trying to bring both sides, as it would be, together to try and find a resolution. And we also have a training element of the company as well, and some of that training belongs to disability awareness training or disability equality training. My 2 conditions that I have that are registered are glaucoma, which is an eye condition which depends on whether you have it through genetics or whether you've developed it in later life, is a decretion in the amount of vision that you have over a period of time. So I was diagnosed with glaucoma at the age of 6, had over 150 operations. I'm now 33, about to turn 34. So a lot of time spent in the medical sector there trying to support me with the eye condition. And I also have dyslexia as well, which I only found out about later on in life at the age of 17. As Esi said, if you could submit your questions as we're going through the presentation, that would be helpful. And if you want to ask any kind of personal questions or direct questions about the conditions, that's absolutely fine also. That's enough from me, and I look forward to taking your questions and talking with you all today.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Roland.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Roland Chesters, and I'm the director of Illuminate. I was diagnosed in 2006 with HIV and AIDS. My AIDS-defining illness was a brain disease, which left me paralyzed. I've now regained use of my limbs and so on and so forth, but obviously still living with HIV, which is controlled. But the brain disease has left me with various other disabilities, such as dyspraxia, and facial blindness, so I don't recognize people. And also HIV itself has had an impact in terms of things like osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. Illuminate, the company I run, provides coaching for mostly adults who become disabled later in life, and provides training and workshops to organizations that want to become more disability aware, disability friendly, disability confident. That's me in a nutshell. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Burrell. Similarly, I run a business on inclusion consultancy, both strategic and strategic, and I run training and webinars for mental health. I have hemiplegia, which is actually the involuntary movement disorder from 2 strokes that I had when I was younger. Obviously I had a speech impairment. I know I do have it, we all know it now, so please do, if you can't understand me, please do holler using the various ways of communicating on here. And actually, if you don't understand me, please do ask me to repeat if necessary. And I look forward to hearing your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And I am Esi Hardy. Thank you so much for joining us today. I run Celebrating Disability, which is the organisation, the business that you signed up for the webinar through. Celebrating Disability is a disability inclusion and equality business, delivering virtual and face-to-face training, if that's ever possible again, and auditing and consulting. So I work with businesses and not-for-profits as well. I have cerebral palsy, and I've had cerebral palsy from about 3 months old. So for me, it's not an acquired disability. It's a disability from birth. I have experience in social care as well as in business as well. I have had personal assistants / support workers / facilitators, whichever word you would prefer to use, since I was 19 years old. So I can talk from the background of having cerebral palsy, from working in the areas that I've explained, but also as a personal experience of employing personal assistants. Brilliant, I can see our first question come through. How exciting is this? Okay. Right, so Jen, hi all, what is the most common fear or the most common question that employers have before employing somebody with a disability? Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Jen. So if we all can answer that question, and if we take 2 minutes with our answers to begin with, I think that would be great. Ryan, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay. I think one of the most common questions is, what can we do to support you, is one. And then there's sometimes almost a question that's asked, and it's the same question again, is how can we support? Is that person going to add as much value? Are they going to be able to work as fast? So they're common questions, and the answer from the person with the disabled person is going to be different depending on, you know, their expertise and the field in which they're working. I think the key at any stage is to try and get that dialogue going as soon as possible in the early stages, so there is no misunderstandings, and everybody, if you set the relationship up on an open dialogue, then hopefully that's how the relationship will continue. Okay,
great, thank you. Roland?
Leonard Cheshire Foundation did a massive piece of research back in 2018. If you Google, you can find the results of that. And they were asking questions of employers around the country, different types of employers. What are the barriers that are preventing you from recruiting people with disabilities? And the biggest barriers that people responded were concerns about cost. Is this going to be expensive? And about how they can integrate the person with a disability into the workforce so that it isn't disruptive to other people and to the service or the goods that they are manufacturing.
Interesting.
Sarah?
I think that personal experience has sort of taught me that a lot is down to knowledge and awareness, and the questions we ask and how we ask them are crucial. And actually, if we, as Ryan said, if we open up a dialogue before we get into it, and we build trust as much as possible before we get into what we need and how we accommodate, that can help to solidify trust in disclosure, in adjustments, in providing the awareness and knowledge that's needed to accommodate and include as people want to do. And the fear that comes from you know, having the fear that people have with that is knowing what to do and what to say. And if you get the question in the right format and you ask it openly and respectfully, you get much more out of it. And if you ask a clear question,
I agree. I completely agree. And I think I'm not going to start asking more questions because we have questions coming through, but I think that opens up to more questions. Like, how do you ask those open questions and how do you get that knowledge? So perhaps if we have time at the end, if somebody else hasn't asked that, we can come back to that because I think that's a really important point. For me personally, I think it's around language. As a wheelchair user, I am very physically, it's very obvious that I have a physical disability. And I think, you know, the questions like, oh, what do you need? Oh, I'm sorry. And the apology that comes after it shows me that there's a fear in asking the wrong thing in the wrong way and offending me. And as I'm a bad driver, I kind of get it. The three people on this webinar will know that I crash wherever I go. And so people are trying not to laugh because it is funny when I crash and I laugh at myself. And so I think for me, I take the lead in telling people or showing people that it's okay to find it funny that I've made a hole in their wall. It's okay to realize, acknowledge that I'm a wheelchair user. And yes, I do need you to open the door. And yes, actually, if you're standing on the wrong side of the door, then I'm probably going to hit you with my wheelchair. So I am going to tell you. And yes, it is okay to ask me if there's anything I need. So that's my fear. We've got some great questions coming in the chat and the Q&A. Sarah, could I ask you, I'm going to ask the questions through the Q&A. Can I ask you in a minute to look at the questions in the chat box for me, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we have a question here from Poppy. So what would be your advice to a young person with a disability who wants to find employment, but is really struggling and ending up volunteering a lot, but having no paid employment? So Roland, can we start with you? Because I think this is one of your expertise areas.
Sure. It's about finding the skills that you have got and the skills that you can acquire through volunteering and being able to demonstrate how you can transfer those skills into the workplace. Even a person with a disability, and I say this tongue in cheek, but even a person with a disability is skilled at doing many, many things. And particularly people with different disabilities are more skilled at doing certain things than people who don't have disabilities. So it's finding your USP, your unique selling point, the thing that you excel at, the thing that you are strongest at, finding the self-confidence to be able to sell yourself as being the expert in that area. And if necessary, and I'm not trying to sell my services in particular, but using a coach to enable you to identify those skills, how to express yourself as being the strongest person in those skills, and selling yourself. It's not easy. I understand it's not easy, but there are ways of doing it.
I completely agree. Does anyone else have something else to add to that?
I do, picking up on what Roland said. I think, like I said, finding a way to explain what your USP is great. But I also know that, like, when you have a disability, we all overcome so many different barriers, and there are things that we're better at because of our disabilities, and it's highlighting that as well as selling that fact. So if I go into an organisation, I know I can problem solve and I'm a good solutions focused type of individual, then you've also got to sell that point, I feel, as well. But I really dislike the notion that, you know, people with disabilities to say, well, people, you know, they should volunteer. But I do think if you're very young, get as much experience as you can as possible, because then you've demonstrated to an organisation that actually I can hold down this placement for this long, so I'm going to add value to, I'm punctual. So I think having as many things as you can on a resume to demonstrate actually I'm going to add value to the organisation. You've got to have the hands-on experience as well as the actual talk when you're in there to back it up. They've got to marry together.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much, guys. Let's go on to some of the questions in the chat box. If Sarah, you can field some of them.
So as far as I can see, there's only one question here. It's referring to the question we often ask actually about whether people prefer the term people with disabilities or disabled person. We all have may have different answers to that. So you go ahead and answer that for yourself.
I think that that's a really good question, and yeah, I think it will show, the answer will show the diversity of thought in that. Do you want to start with that, Sarah?
Okay, and I've just scrolled up and saw there's more to it, sorry.
Okay.
And it's about inclusive language. So I'm trying to, again, it's about what people prefer. And I think the answer really is to ask an open question. So say, actually ask, what do you prefer? And then you can tailor that to the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that removes the assumption from the question. And that's much more, I think it, more trustworthy questions, so you can actually hear what they prefer to be referred to as.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Ryan?
Right, okay. So when I first met yourself, Esi, I had a view that the term was people with disabilities, and it was always because I felt, well, you know, you put the person first and the disability second. And then when I met you, you had a different rationale, which is, well, but the disability is a part of you, which I totally agree with. And, you know, there's always the sort of difference between, if I was to go into a shop, a supermarket, for example, and I go in there as a person with a disability, if you remove my disability, I still have an impairment. So until such time that happens, I do actually now believe it's a disabled person. However, I don't feel that people should ever get offended if you use disabled person or person with a disability, because they're interchangeable. I think you can ask the individual, but then the person asking the question can't always be expected to remember. But I don't think it's for any one organisation to say it's disabled person or person with a disability, because it's not them that live with the disability. So, you know, if I want to refer to myself as a disabled person, then that's up to me. If you all want to refer to yourselves as people with disabilities, that's up to you. But I don't think we should get caught up too much, because the two are so interchangeable. And actually what it does is it prevents conversation from taking place through fear. And that's not what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Roland?
I'd like to broaden the discussion out a bit. For me personally, I have no for or against being called a person with a disability or a disabled person. It is completely immaterial to me. The things that I do not like are people who will say, oh, you're suffering with HIV. I'm not suffering, I'm living with. There's also the expressions like disclosure of a disability in the workplace. Why do we have to disclose? It sounds as though it's a closely guarded secret that we only let out, we only reveal to a small number of intimate people. That's not the situation at all. Even things like, you've already said it earlier on, Esi, so forgive me, but acquiring a disability. It's like I went online and found the right color, right size, next day delivery.
Right.
I didn't go out and purchase this disability. I became unwell. Why can we not just use those basic, simple terms? Why do we have to make life complicated?
Well, it just makes it more personal, isn't it? It's almost following the medical model way that actually there's a problem here, and so we need to give it a label. Whereas looking at the individual and making it personal to them. I completely agree. I am going to answer the question. This intertwines really well with the question that Jenny has about the the choice between using the word person with a disability, a disabled person, especially in relation to legislation and academics. So hopefully, Jenny, we're answering your question at the same time. But for me, as Ryan said, I prefer the term disabled person. I feel that my disability is external, that it's caused by an external force. It's caused by society rather than a force. Not putting in the implementing the things in society that are needed in order for me to access the world the way I would like to access it, or the way I have to access it to survive in the world and to live the way I want to. And that comes down to anything from my social life, to my work life, to the attitudes of my friends, to the attitudes of the educators that educate me, to the shops that I go in, to the businesses that I interact with and everything. So for me, recognizing that I'm being disabled by the society I live in is really important. But also embracing my disability and learning to celebrate it, for want of a better word, and to advertise my own business, to realise that disability is a positive, and without the disability, I wouldn't have had the experiences I've had, and it wouldn't have led me to the career I'm in now. I definitely hope that I wouldn't be representing the thoughts of disabled people if I wasn't myself have a disability and have lived experience of that. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm just going to, you'll see me looking at the left. It's because I've got some other questions that have been posed to us on my iPad. So I'm just opening it up to have a look. So we have a question about speech impairment. So maybe Sarah, I can turn to you first for this. So how does a speech impairment impact your mental health / your ability to climb the ladder in a career choice? And that's from a person called Sarah. And maybe they're a disabled person themselves wanting to move up.
I think that's a very big question, but let me attempt to narrow it down a bit. I mean, I think that I would hold my hand up and say that my speech impairment is the most impactful aspect of my disability, and it's impacted every stage of my life, and actually it's created a huge barrier for me to feel confident about speaking, to override fear that I will be assumed something I'm not, and the overriding kind of message that I love to talk, and actually it's a very weird quandary to not be able to talk or have confidence to speak properly, or as a typical person would, and to want to say things. And that's, and being a trainer and consultant in this space, and wanting to be heard for what I can bring to the table, it's a quandary between anxiety, depression, and depression about that aspect, but also the need to expose more people to speech impairment and to start normalising speech impairment in order for there not to be the big barrier that I've had to face. And actually, when I'm in an interview situation or in a meeting situation, I get instantly anxious about how I'm speaking and what I'm saying. That actually what comes out often in a scenario where there is that power play going on, I get a very, very anxious feeling, and that impacts what I say, and actually the performance that I give in an interview, the performance that I can do my job well, the performance that I am capable, and I am qualified, and I am reaching for the stars. And so it's an important thing for me to be at least a drop in the ocean in normalising speech impairment at a detriment of almost of my own anxiety. But it's so much more important for me to normalise and get what I say out there. And so very, very complicated question. And I feel that it's a lot more than this, but this is what I'm going to give you for now. But actually, it's so important that we normalise it. And because it's not out there frequently enough, it is not yet normalised.
I have does anyone else have anything else they would like to add to what Sarah was saying? Sorry, Ryan.
Sorry, not on that particular point, no.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So Sarah, if I start with you, but then if anyone else would like to add anything, please do. So from John has asked, he said, I have a speech impairment, and I find often that although I tell people to ask me to repeat myself, they politely pretend they've heard me and change the subject. What would you do?
I have had to create a sentence in a pre-prepared sentence for those situations, because it's when we do speak, when I go to speak, I'm not always understood the first time, and you can definitely tell a lot of the time if someone has heard you or not. From the body language and and actually having a pre-prepared statement, what I say is that I address the elephant in the room, and I actually say, you know what, I'm well aware that I have a speech impairment. Please do ask me to repeat. If that is not heard and they still are anxious to do that, repeat it. And actually, I'd rather be heard than be nodded at. Because that's important to me that I am heard in this situation. And you are able to say that, because I think that that's an important thing to be able to say and ensure that you are actually listened to.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I have a comment here from the Q&A from Terry. He says, I am a manager at the City of Westminster with a speech impairment. Believe in yourself and take your time. Go on you, Sarah. I respect the passion and commitment.
Thank you.
That's a really nice comment. Thank you very much, Terry. Okay, so I have another, I don't know if it's the same Terry or a different Terry. I have another question from a Terry. And this one I'm going to turn to you, Ryan, to begin with. If there is a clash in the workplace as to what reasonable adjustments are reasonable, what should an employee/employer do about this?
Well, I think it's always about, like you said, opening up dialogue and trying to bring that out as soon as possible, face to face, and have a discussion. Now, obviously, as I said earlier at the top, that I get involved in mediation now. I think there are multiple avenues in which you can have these discussions. So if there's an individual within the workplace who's struggling, it might be identifying what that is, and it might be bringing in, say, like as Roland is a coach, and having a session to bring that out. It might be conflict coaching, bringing that out. But if there is some type of rift between a manager and an individual who has a disability, and we're talking about adjustments and things of that nature, then why not use something like mediation? It doesn't always have to be seen as a negative. You can bring it in way earlier on in the process, before things like the word grievance are thrown around and disciplinaries. It's about open communication and dialogue, and the amount of times I'm quite fortunate in the fact that when I'm going into workplaces and there is a conflict or there is a disagreement or people are not sure, the earlier you nip this in the bud, the earlier you have the conversation, and we start talking about solutions, and we develop an understanding and empathy. So I understand what's making you struggle, you're understanding what you need from me. When we start having this dialogue back and forth, you'll be amazed at how a difficult situation, or situations that sometimes sour, becomes great communication, and people actually getting on with each other. So I would just find a channel, or have it within your structure, in your policy, that when X, Y, and Z happens, this is how we sort it. What I'll always say when training I deliver is, if something goes wrong with a computer, where do we go? We go to the IT department. If we have a difficulty in communicating, where do we go? There's always that question. We need to have these structures in place so we know what to do straight away. And if you don't know, never be afraid to ask.
Brilliant, thank you. So I have a follow-up question to that on this, on the Q&A from Patrick, who starts by saying, I have a follow-up question you are answering now. How do you start the dialogue? what should you say or present? Sorry, that's my fault. What should you say or present it? Is there any specific example? So Ryan, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. Roland, would you like to start with that one?
So I think one of the first things we've got to do is to remove the term reasonable from the discussion. We are now seeing a movement towards calling these workplace adjustments rather than reasonable adjustments, because the argument is always around what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. The legislation doesn't define what is reasonable or not. EHRC has given some supplementary information about what should be taken into consideration when deciding whether an adjustment is reasonable or not. And these things include the obvious, like the cost, but also things like disruption to business, and making sure that actually the reasonable adjustment, the workplace adjustment, actually is beneficial. It's not something that the employer imposes on the person with a disability, saying this will make you a better employee. It has, as both Ryan and Esi have already said, has to be a mutual agreement. I think that, as Ryan has already said, that communication is really important. But it does also come down to making sure that the employee, the person with a disability, has shared information about their disability with the employer. Again, the Equality Act says that an employer has a duty to put in place measures if they suspect that a person may have a disability. But it makes it that much easier for the person with a disability to be able to work to their very best in the workplace if they are working in an environment, in a culture, in an organization that allows them, enables them to openly discuss and talk about their disability.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and I will just add to that from my point, if I could, Sarah, and then I'll come back to you. Absolutely, I think the onus has to come from the organisation. You know, the person with the disability or the impairment, or the person that needs the access requirements, as you say, has to feel confident and comfortable, to feel valued and safe to come forward. And that comes from the organisation communicating that in the first place. And so rather than, for example, rather than having just one door to go through to talk about that discussion, having several, so having it as your open, inclusive culture in the first place, so that everybody feels, no matter what, they can come to the organisation and they can say, actually, I'm having a few issues, I'm not quite sure what the solution is, but I want to open that dialogue and talk about it and come to an understanding together. I'm not telling you everything that I need, but I think I know a little bit about what I might need. Can we sit down and discuss it together, please? And then finding those solutions. And also using those resources, whether they are in the organisation or external to the organisation as well, understanding what those resources are and understanding how to tap into them as well. Sarah, do you need to add something?
I'm going to reiterate a little bit about the communication necessary, and actually making time, allocating time and allowing a conversation to start. I think that's a key thing. Actually, you're right, it should not be one occasion. It should be an open dialogue that continues throughout our employment. Because we said before, I think that not everything stays the same, and actually we become aware of things later on or whatever, and actually the more comfort that you can project around well-being and the protection of your health, mentally, physically, and the importance the company puts on well-being and mental and physical health can be projected through policy, like marketing, all of that. Inductions that start with, we care about you and we would like to optimize your time here, or optimize your performance, and optimize the way you do things to make you enable and empower you to work to your best potential. And that's a conversation everyone can have, not necessarily the two people, because we all work differently, we all accessing differently, we all have a preference over communication mode or whatever. And I think that it's a question that can be opened up to the floor and engage with your employees regularly about that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to say the last point because I am the host and I can, that I really like what you were saying, Sarah, about it kind of being a positive thing. So the onus is on the positive. We just want to make it easier for you to be as productive as possible rather than a negative, oh, what can't you do? What can we put in so you can do it? Which I think is really, really important as well. So Roland, I'm going to direct this next question at you. This question is from Neil. So there is so much stigma around AIDS and HIV. Within my organisation, there is a staff network that I belong to, but I find that on a daily basis, I come up against people's arrogant and negative perceptions. What is your advice to help me change people's attitudes?
Really good question. And it embodies also that question about the difference between visible and invisible disabilities. In my own experience, I have found that, having been in that situation, that providing information, becoming an educator, becoming an advocate, becoming a spokesperson, if you like, is really important. But not necessarily everybody feels able to take up that position. There is lots of information available out there about the current situation regarding HIV and AIDS. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of misconception, still a lot of mythology out there as well, which is outdated and incorrect. If you don't feel able yourself to challenge those attitudes, then bring in somebody from outside who can educate and inform. So for example, I'm a part of a group of volunteers at Chance Against Trust, which is the largest HIV support charity in the UK. We're called Positive Voices. We go and give talks to whoever will have us, schools, universities, places of employment, any other groups, about what it's like to be currently living with HIV and in some cases living with AIDS. And about the impact that it has on our lives, but also about the impact that may or may not have on the people around us. Use resources that are available. But also, Neil, if you want to get in touch with me directly, then please feel free to do so.
Great, thank you very much. And Neil and everybody else listening today, after this webinar, I will, in the next 72 hours, be sending out contact details of all the panelists. So if you have any follow-up questions for any of us, please feel free to reach out at any time. Okay, so I have a question here, just changing the tone a little bit, but I think it's really important as well. It's from David. Have you got any funny stories to tell us in relation to your disability experience? Who would like to go first?
How long you got?
Wow, not long. Knowing how much you like to talk, not long. Roland, can we go to you first?
Okay, gallows humor. As I said, one of the results of having HIV is that I am now dyspraxic, which affects my balance. Used to go cycling, took up cycling again once I'd recovered some of my abilities, and immediately fell over twice, fractured a vertebrae, and ended up wearing a neck brace for almost a year. And I would meet people at work who hadn't seen me for some time, saw the neck brace, would come up and say to me, my goodness, what happened? And I'd start off by saying to them, well, I've been diagnosed with HIV, I've got dyspraxia, and you'd see their eyes glazing over, and suddenly they had a very important phone call they had to go and make. And I got that message. So when this continued happening, I decided to make life much more fun. So when somebody would come up to me and say, my goodness, what happened to you? I'd say, well, the doctor says I've really got to give up hang gliding because it really doesn't work. And immediately, hang gliding, wow. You have to enjoy the fun moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan.
Oh, well, I mean, due to the nature of my disability and having a vision impairment, there are lots of people out there that really do want to support and help. And I'm often asked the question sometimes, you know, oh, if someone tries to offer you help, you know, if you want to decline, how do you do it? And you can politely do that. But in some instances, and you know, it's not always fun, but I try to see the brighter side of it. I've had people try and physically support me, and they've not always asked me to do so. And I always say to people, if they want to physically, you know, touch me in any way, you've got to ask first. Yeah. So I'm at the traffic lights, the symbol before you go across the road, and someone will come over to me and they'll physically take me across the road and start marching me across the road. And I've on many occasions had to say, you know, let's just call them Peter for the sake of this discussion. Peter, really appreciate your support, but will you take me back across, because that's not the way I was going.
Excellent. Sarah?
I'm racking my brain because I think I got a lot of examples, but the most hilarious one, I guess, was I was giving a lecture like a few years back, and I stupidly was wearing a dress. I never wear dresses for a reason that will become apparent. And I was a bit nervous, you know, chatting away at the front, and I put my arm behind my back, so it gets in the way, and it's pretty annoying, but also it's quite tense and annoying as well. And I was, you know, quite anxious at the start, and a bit of a, you know, mistakes happen, and but I didn't gradually, my arm was lifting my dress up from the back. I hadn't really got enough arms to aid that, and so all my class, my peers and my lecturers saw everything, and pretty much up at my waist, and I was like, mate, so sorry, and I actually swore. But actually, that was a great icebreaker, because the worst had happened, you know. And what better could you ask for to have an icebreaker like that and actually break the barrier of tension? I actually enabled me to repeat what I was saying in a much more classy and relaxed way. So we all had a laugh, so it was fine.
So mine happened just the other day, actually. So I have a whizzy dizzy, if that's a word, super duper wheelchair that lies back into a vertical position. So I went for a walk, my one chance to have exercise, if you call exercise with your wrist, a day. So I find new walks. I live in the countryside. So every time I go for a walk, I try and find a new walk. So I don't necessarily know where I'm going or where I'm going to end up. And I've been going on this walk for about 45 minutes. And I came up to kind of one of those kind of gates where it's quite high, but you don't have to open it. And I thought, well, if I lower my wheelchair and lay back a little bit, I can probably get under this, a bit like limbo dancing. So I got under it and I thought, woohoo, well done, Esi, you've done a good job. And then my seatbelt strap got tied onto the back of my wheelchair. So the backrest wouldn't lift up back into the seated position. So I was like, oh, this is fun. I'm going to have to go along lying down. So I was going along lying down, and I came up to another one. It was quite difficult to drive because I couldn't actually see where I was going or look forward. But I came up to another one and I thought, okay, time to do this again. And I got under it and I thought, okay, well done, Esi. And then I caught it on the edge of the gate and it pulled the cord out of my control box. Oh. And the cord that goes between your control box and the rest of your wheelchair is like the wheelchair's brain. So it completely stopped moving. So there I am lying down in my wheelchair in the middle of a field and couldn't move. So I had to call my PA through, I'm not going to say his name because he'll alert himself, but through my iPhone and say, I'm stuck. And Michelle said, where are you? And I said, well, I don't really know, but just drive around, you know, I'm sure, you know, maybe you'll find me. And so I could see her driving up and down the lanes. And so I lifted my chair into the air so she could see me. But before she found me, a police officer came up behind me and said, "Are you all right there, love?" And I was like, "Hello, can you please help me? I'm a bit stuck." So he had to help me fix my wheelchair. And he said, "Well, where are you trying to get to?" And I told him where I was going to. And he said, "Well, do you know how to get back? Because it's quite far away." And I said, "No." So he guided me back in his police car going about 2 miles an hour while I followed behind him. So it was both humiliating and very, very funny, but it's a good story to remember. Okay, brilliant. So we are nearly at the end. We're 12 minutes before the end. So I'm just going to have a look if we've got any final questions. Okay, so one about hidden and visible disabilities from Anne. Are there any real differences when it comes to support between hidden and visible disabilities?
That's interesting.
Okay, Ryan, let's go for you first.
Well, I think from a practical point of view, depending on the situation, there might be some differences. But as I always say to people, it's never a one-size-fits-all approach. So even if you get someone with the same condition as me on the same day, born at the same time, it's not going to affect them differently. It might affect them differently. So you've got to ask the individual. But I think sometimes there's a perception difference, because if you see someone with a physical disability, you know it straight away. If you have a hidden disability, then you don't know. And it can be sometimes difficult if you have a hidden disability to then bring that conversation up, because people don't always recognise that you need support. So that can be difficult to bring up. I mean, I have a vision impairment now, which is very noticeable, but there was a time that I wasn't registered blind, I was partially sighted. So I've been able to see the transition of people in the way they've kind of gone about trying to support me. And people can be very worried about getting it wrong and not offering support. My advice in that situation is, if you think someone needs support, always offer that support. Don't be too concerned about how you ask it. Just be yourself, be nice. And then it's empowering to the person with disability. If they don't want the support, they'll politely say, or hopefully politely say, "I don't need the support." And if they do, then they'll be very thankful. And if you do meet a rude person with a disability and they dismiss your support in a nasty way, just remember that that was just one person who was rude, and that person actually better support.
Okay, brilliant. I think that's a really important message. Sarah?
I mean, I guess I have my hidden disability, like is mental health condition. I've had like severe depression and high anxiety fluctuating throughout my life, and actually disclosing to use that ugly word again, but disclosing my depression and anxiety to anyone is hard, especially if people you think know you well, or you think will have a positive response, actually don't respond as you hope, or as you wish that they would. And actually, I've had experience of this taking that manager, like my manager, aside in previous roles, and actually saying that actually I have got quite a severe anxiety and depression that fluctuates, and the different responses to that are huge. And actually the disparity in responses to my physical disability, which are apparently easier, but not always the case, easy to almost dismissal of the fact that it affects me. And actually depression and anxiety really affect me, and actually that's probably the major concern that I have in a workplace, that actually my employer know that affects me, and not only know it, but ask me questions about how we together can go about accommodating or resolving that. And actually and that's a real thing for me.
Okay, thank you. Roland?
First of all, there's the issue about vocabulary again, and using the expression hidden disabilities implies that there is something that has, again, to be kept secret. I prefer the term invisible disabilities as opposed to visible disabilities, and all of my disabilities are invisible. And I go back to what I was saying before. It's about enabling the person to be as open as they want to be about their disabilities. For a person with non-visible disabilities, it is up to that individual to share as much as they want to share, and to be clear in the purpose about why they are sharing that information. So it's not as if the first day in my new office, my new place of employment, when I go around introducing myself to people, I'm going to go up to a new person and say, hello, I'm Roland, I've just started. By the way, I'm living with HIV and AIDS. I've got dyspraxia and various other things. Is that okay with you? Because why would I? And I'm sure that if I did do that, then the person would be sitting there with their mouth open thinking, who the heck is this? There are ways and ways of doing it. But if you are a person who is living with invisible disabilities, then there is always that requirement that it's up to you to share that information if you want to get some response or reaction or positive support for it, as opposed to a person with visible disabilities. And in my early days, when I was newly diagnosed with HIV and not in a good place at all, part of my brain was thinking it'd be so much easier if I had a visible disability, that I wouldn't need to have to go around and explaining to people what has happened to me.
You know what, actually, I'm going to answer the question, but when I was at university, there was a person in my class who had ME, and she said to me, oh, I wish I had a physical disability, your life was so much easier. And at the time, I wanted to thump her. But, you know, when I thought about it years later, you know, because I was 19 at the time, when I thought about it years later, I understood the sentiment of what she was saying. Because of the stigma that surrounds invisible disabilities, and because of the lack of understanding, awareness, and empathy towards it a lot of the time as well.
And also people are scared of invisible disabilities. I mean, Sarah's already mentioned mental health, which is a huge issue in the workplace. And thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And we have moved forward a lot in recent years in making it much easier to talk about mental health in the workplace, but there is still a great deal of stigma attached to it. And the stigma comes from fear created by a lack of information. So for me, I go back to what I said earlier, I do feel an individual responsibility to educate and inform, but I appreciate that not everybody feels comfortable in doing that.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to answer the question. So I would say, as a physically disabled person, the assumptions that are made towards me as a wheelchair user is that we're all the same and that we have all the same needs. So obviously, you know, like invisible disabilities, like every other impairment and every other person, every impairment is unique to the individual. But people categorize wheelchair users and physically disabled people as being able to handle one thing and not being able to handle another. So my issues come with, oh, well, why can't you put your own coat on? Jimmy Bob can. And why can't you do this? He knew the answer to that. And why don't you know that? And why aren't you willing to be our advocate? I mean, I do advocate now a lot for disability. That is my job. But I haven't always advocated in such a way for disability, but I've always been expected to. And there comes with that quite a resentment in myself and with the other people around me, that I'm always the person that's meant to stand up in quotes and speak about woe is I, woe is my life, I'm disabled. I also get a lot of people, not so much now, I think I have a more grumpy face and headphones on, but I used to get a lot of people coming up to me on the street going, oh, I feel really sorry for you, or bless you, you're doing so well. And sometimes I would play on it and say, oh my gosh, yes, my life is terrible. Thank you for the coffee you've just bought me to make me feel better. And sometimes I would say, you have no idea what you're talking about. I have a great life, depending on the mood I'm in. But I think as a physically disabled person, the biggest challenge for me is people's assumptions that I will or won't be able to cope. And actually, I can't have a brain, because obviously our brains are in our feet. and because my feet don't walk all the time when I'm outside, then I can't have any. We have 3 minutes left. What I would like to end with, we will send, as I said, our contact details around at the end of this. So if you would like to get in touch with any of us at any point, please do not hesitate to follow us on social media, give us a call, send us an email, follow our mailing lists, book us for a training session, whatever you would like to do. But now we have 2 minutes left because I talked. So one final thought from each of us, one sentence to wrap up what we would like people to leave with today. Sarah, I'll pick on you first.
Okay. I want to actually highlight, that we are all different and we all, require the same conversation to be as open and to try and educate us, each other as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Ryan?
I think it goes back to something earlier that I said, which is really about open dialogue. And if you're there and you want to support someone, not to be afraid to ask, but also at the same time, if you don't get it right, don't be afraid to get it wrong. We're all, as Roland pointed out earlier, we're here to be educated and we're all here to learn in the journey of life. But if you want to do something good and something kind, don't let the words get in the way of the point you're trying to make, which is assist. I think people really appreciate that.
Roland?
When we're thinking about workplace adjustments, bear in mind that actually workplace adjustments benefit many, many people, not just the person with a disability. When I became disabled, I was working as a civil servant in Westminster in a very grand Victorian building. I became chair of the Disabled Staff Network, and we put in place measures to make sure that we had automatic doors that would open to assist ostensibly people in wheelchairs and so on and so forth. But we found that pregnant mothers, people carrying heavy parcels, and many other people also benefited from automatic doors. It's not just about people with disabilities.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I mean, I think I would like to leave with recognizing that disabled people are experts. So even if they're not professional experts in the field of disability, we are experts in our own disability. That doesn't mean that we know all the answers to what we need, but it doesn't mean that we should be ignored and the answers should be found for us. It's about working with us and bringing us into that discussion, whether it's a discussion about our support needs or a discussion about what we would like to do. Assumptions are made even when it comes to social occasions as well. So remembering that we do know what we like, we know what our desires, our wants and our needs are as well. So bring us into that conversation and make us part of your community. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, panelists.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, well, thank you for coming, and thank you very much all of our participants for staying for the whole time and for your great questions. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.